How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Gimel, Daf 33 of Masechta Shevuos. Okay, Gewaldig. We're going to learn two Mishnayos today. Interesting stuff. I'll talk of the Gemara on the first Mishnayos. On the first Mishnah is going to be It's going to be lots of sections. There's like you're gonna. It's good. It's good. It's good. Modeh b'knas potter and ties into davar gorm the moment. Chatzin ezek nizka, chatzin ezek knasa. There's like a lot of layers to it. But anyways, it's going to be interesting, and then we'll get to the second Mishnah. It's a good Shevuos dika daf. Okay. Speaking of Shevuos, this daf, I bet this daf must be right around Shevuos time. Okay. So we're going to start at Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, about 5 lines in to the Amud and Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, at the Mishnah. Mashbi'a ani aleichem im lo tavo'u v'ta'iduni sheish li biyad ploni pikorim v'tzumas yad v'gez v'aved shvuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha eidos ein chayven el ha'achas shvuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha sheish l'cha biyad ploni pikorim v'tzumas yad v'gez v'aved chayven el ha'achas v'achas. So I think in all of the scenarios, I think over the next day or two, I think I'm going to try to keep it where Levi and Yehuda are the witnesses, and Shimon is the guy who's coming to Levi and Yehuda and doing the talking. Now, Shimon sometimes might be claiming for himself, sometimes he might be claiming for somebody else, whatever it is, but I think I'm going to try to keep it sort of... I think I just ripped my shirt. I think I'm going to try to keep it... it's like the setup that Shimon is approaching Levi and Yehuda. One second, I want to roll up my sleeves a little bit more. Let's see. But I think by doing so, it's ripping it. I'm going to America soon, so maybe when I go to America, I'll buy new clothing. Alright, let's see. Okay, where are we? Alright, let's go. Okay, hurry up. Let's go. People are waiting. Okay. So, where are we? So let's read that again. So Mashbi'a ani aleichem. So Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, were we talking about Shimon and Levi? I can't even remember anything anymore, but these are getting a little bit like Bava Kama, Mitzi, Bava Basra kinds of dafs with lots of people. Shimon and Levi and Yehuda. It's a good thing we're not using Geva and Itamar and who else? Geva, Itamar, Nadav, Neria. There's somebody else I'm forgetting. Itamar, Geva, Nadav, there was Yishai and Geva. No, Itamar, Geva, Nadav, Yishai, and Neria. It's a good thing we're not using them. Alright. Mashbi'a ani aleichem. So if Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, Mashbi'a ani aleichem, im lo tavo v'ta'iduni, if you don't come and testify, sheyesh li bi'ad ploni, that I have by Ruvain, Pikorin, I lent him a book, v'tzumas yad, I lent him money, v'gezel, and he stole from me, v'aveda, and I lost something and he has it, shvuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha eidos. And you know what Levi and Yehuda say? Shvuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha eidos. We don't know anything. Ein chayav en elachas. So only chayav, they later admitted, so they only chayav one korban shvuos eidos. Shvuos she'ein anu yodin, she'esh l'cha bi'ad ploni, pikarim, v'tzumas yad, v'gezel, v'aveda, chayav k'lachas v'achas. If they specify each thing that they don't know anything about, allegedly, so then they're going to be chayav, when they admit it, they're going to be chayav for each of those items. Somewhat similarly, mashbi ani aleichem lo tavo v'ta'idu, she'esh li bi'ad ploni, pikarim, chitim v'sarim v'kusmin. Okay, so Shimon comes to Levi and Yehuda and says, hey guys, can you testify for me that I have deposited by Ruvain wheat, barley, and kusmin? What's that one again? What's that thing that people like to eat? Spelt. Shvuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha eidos, they say, we don't know what you're talking about. Ein chayav elachas, only chayav once. Shvuos she'ein anu yodin l'cha eidos, she'esh l'cha biyad ploni, chitim, v'sarim, v'kusmin, But if they specify that we don't know about any wheat, about any barley, about any spelt, chayiv no klachas v'achas, they're chayiv for each thing that they claim to not know anything about. Mashbi ani aleichem. Now this is where this is essentially, the Gemara is really only talking about this part, if I'm not mistaken. The Gemara is really all focused on this next section. It's going to be an interesting Gemara. It's going to be an interesting trip. Mashbi ani aleichem, I'm swearing you, if you don't come and testify for me, sheish li biyad ploni nezek. So Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, come testify for me that Reuven owes me nezek, and he caused damage that he has to pay for. V'chatzi nezek, half damages. Tashlume kefel, double damages for theft. But tashlume abu v'chamisha, of course, by tvicha u'mechira. V'sha'onas ish ploni es biti, or that Reuven was ones my daughter, ufita es biti, or was mefate my daughter, and therefore he owes me payments. The question is, which payments are we talking about? But anyways, okay, v'sheikani b'ni, or that my son hit me. Now, did not wound me, because if my son wounded me, then we'd be talking about a chiyuv misa. We're not talking about a chiyuv misa right now. But he hit me, and therefore there are payments related to that. V'shechavo bi chaveri, or that my friend wounded me. V'sheidlik es gadishi, or he burnt down my haystack. B'yom kippurim, on Yom Kippur. Now, in Yom Kippur is a chiyuv kares, and we're going to see the Gemara is chayiv misa. Well, let's assume he's not chayiv misa, and there's a chiyuv mamun. Hari'elu chayovin. So, in all of the cases that we just mentioned, nezek, chatzi nezek, kefel, abava chamisha, ones, mefate, my son hit me, my friend wounded me, burned down my thing on Yom Kippur, whatever it is. In all these cases, if they deny it, if they swear that they don't know anything, then they admit that they do, so then there will be a korban Shevuos Eidus. Cheve, here comes the fun part. Here comes who's ready to have fun? I don't hear you. Okay. I hear the people outside. The truth is, Baruch Hashem, I don't hear the people outside. Oh. So this morning the Houthis, they launched a missile at us, and there was like a school. It must have been like a school class outside with like a bunch of kids and like a teacher. And so the Houthis launched a missile, so we get the sirens go off and everything. So I think I overheard. The teachers like trying to keep the kids like calm so that they can like go to like a shelter. And I think my neighbor runs out. Everybody, run! Go to the shelter! Go to the shelter now! It's like, I think the teachers are trying to keep all the kids calm, and my neighbor is just like, everybody quick! go, run! I think, but anyways, my neighbor is good. I'll go upon him. Okay. So, Ibayu de asa kasha, says the Gemara. Mashbia ede knas mau. Okay. What happens if it's a case of a knas? What happens if a case of a knas? Let's just talk about kefel, let's say. Okay? Now, the Mishnah mentions kefel, but let's pretend for a second that the Mishnah doesn't mention kefel, just so we have an example of a knas, okay? So let's say Shimon goes to Levi and Yehuda, alright? And he says, hey, Levi and Yehuda, can you come and testify for me? I know that you witnessed that Reuven, let's say, stole from me, and therefore he owes me not just the principal, but also kefel. I'm just using kefel just as an example of a fine, right? Of course, the principal amount is not a fine; it's what he's owed, right? But the double payment that a ganef pays is a fine, that we fine him double what he stole. So that's kefel. So that's a fine. So what happens in a scenario? And forget about the Mishnah. We're going to have to, because yes, I know the Mishnah mentions kefil. The Gemara is going to talk about that. But let's not worry about the Mishnah. The Gemara right now is asking, what about a fine? If Shimon comes to Levi and Yehuda and says, hey, Levi and Yehuda, Reuven owes me money. Not money that is a principal amount, but a fine, a knas. Okay? Let's just say we're talking about And let's just say, as an example, we're talking about kefel. Okay, again, forget about the Mishnah for now. Let's just focus on the Gemara's question. What happens when we're talking about a fine? So let's say Reuven stole from Shimon, and Shimon now wants Levi and Yehuda to testify what they saw, which is that Reuven stole from him, and that way Reuven will have to pay the principal plus, twice the amount as a fine. And then, so there's this fine. Okay? Forget about the principal amount. We're specifically talking about a fine, okay? Specifically, maybe even Chatzi Nezik could potentially be a better, whatever it is. The Gemara doesn't give an example, so I'm trying to find an example, but we're specifically focusing on the fine part, okay? The fact that there is a fine that needs to be paid. Forget about the principal amount. A fine is what we're talking about. Reuven owes a fine to be paid to Shimon. Okay. And Shimon wants Levi and Yehuda to testify about that fine that Reuven owes him. Shimon and Levi say, Shevuos she'einanu yodin l'cha edus. They swear that they don't know any testimony, and then they admit it. So the shaila is there a korban Shevuos edus when it comes to a fine? There are many layers to how. What is that? Lashon hatov medaber elai. That's nice. There are many layers to this question. What are the layers to this question? So first of all, it relates to, we'll see, I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'm going to first go through the layers outside and then maybe read it inside. I think I'm probably going to start with doing that. If I decide in the middle, hey, actually I'd rather read it inside, so maybe we'll switch in the middle. But I think I'm going to start by explaining things outside. So one layer is the layer of Moda B'Knas Potter, that somebody who admits about, right, that he owes a fine is Potter from paying that fine. That's one layer. And there's a machlok between the Chacham and Reb Elazar Reb Shimon about that. There's also another layer, is what we learned, I think it was yesterday. Yeah. The machlok is between also the Chacham and Reb Elazar Reb Shimon about Dover Agorim L'Mamun Kimamun Dam. There's also that layer. After this, we're going to get to another layer, which is Chatzi Nezek a Knas, or is it Mammon? I wonder if we should get to that as well. It's pretty straightforward, but that's another. Wait, let me think for a second. When do I want to? Because each one of these has its own discussion that needs discussing. And the question is do I want to keep stopping for discussions? Should I do all the discussions now? Then we could just kind of read the Gemara. Wait, where do I want to start? Oh, yeah. Where do I want to start? Okay, I think it makes sense to start. Okay, yeah, let's just go one layer at a time. Okay, so we'll start with the first layer. The first layer being Moda B'Knas Potter. Who can tell me what Moda B'Knas Potter is? Well, we've learned about this in Nizikin already. We're still in Nizikin, but we're getting towards the end. We're in the last months of Nizikin. Moda B'Knas Potter means that let's say if we're using our example of Kefel, so if Reuven steals from Shimon, okay, if Reuven steals from Shimon, he's a ganif, not a gazlan, but a ganif, so then Reuven needs to pay Shimon double what he stole, okay? So now, if Reuven comes to Bezdin and he says, hey, I stole from Shimon, so he admits that he stole, so he'll be exempt from paying the fine, the kefil. Of course, he'll have to pay Shimon back what he stole, the principal amount, but the fine, we're not going to fine him. He admitted it, we're not going to fine him. Moda B'Knas Potter. If he admits it, so then he's Potter. Now, there's a machlokes between Reb Elazar Reb Shimon and the Chachamim about what does it mean that he's Potter? Is he Potter forever? If witnesses come and testify that Reuven stole from Shimon, i.e. if Levi and Yehuda come and testify that Reuven stole from Shimon, would he still be Potter? So according to the Chachamim, yeah, he would. According to the Chachamim, Moda B'Knas Potter simply means that if Reuven comes to court and he says, look, I stole from Shimon, I admit it. Levi and Yehuda had not come yet to testify. Reuven preempts them and says, I admit, I stole from Shimon. I get it, I have to pay Shimon back, but by doing so, he's potter, exempt from paying the kefel, from paying the fine. And even if Levi and Yehuda were to come later and testify that Reuven stole from Shimon, Reuven would still be exempt from paying kefel because he admitted it. Moed b'knas potter. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, however, disagrees and says, no, what Moed b'knas potter means is that if Reuven comes to Bezdin and admits that he stole from Shimon, we'll say, okay, by his own admittance, we're not going to be mechayiv him kefel by his own admittance. So when he admits, yeah, I stole from Shimon, we're not going to say, okay, if you stole from Shimon, you have to pay kefel. No, by his own admittance, if we're just going by his own admittance, he would not have to pay kefel. But, says Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, if later on 2 witnesses come, Levi and Yehuda come and they testify that Reuven, they say we're testifying that Reuven stole from Shimon, well, now that there's testimony, he will have to pay kefel. Now what's the big nafkamina for us and for Shevuos Ha'edus? Well, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that any time Levi and Yehuda come to Bezdin to testify about Reuven stealing from Shimon, they'll be mechayiv Reuven to pay kefel, to pay the fine, regardless of if Reuven admitted in Bezdin that he stole from Shimon, or if he regardless of if he did admit or if he didn't admit. It makes no difference. Even if he did admit, by Levi and Yehuda coming and testifying that Reuven stole from Shimon, he's now going to have to pay kefil. Okay, so if he didn't admit that he stole from Shimon and Levi and Yehuda are coming and testifying that Reuven stole from Shimon, or even if he did admit, but now Levi and Yehuda are testifying about it, either way, Reuven is going to have to pay kefil to Shimon. So if that's the case, certainly then, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, in a case of a fine, let's say in our case of kefil, if Levi and Yehuda swear that they don't know any testimony and then later admit that they do, certainly they would have to bring a korban Shevuos Ha'edus because they are the key to being mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon the kefil. Okay, so then certainly this kefil, this fine, is mammon, right? Meaning, right. Levi and Yehuda have the ability to testify that Reuven stole from Shimon and be mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon kefil. Therefore, that is money, right? By then coming and testifying, they'll be mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon. And by refusing to testify and swearing that they don't know any testimony, they're denying Shimon that payment. According to the Chachamim, however, it's more nuanced. Because according to the Chachamim, they say that if Reuven were to come to Bezdin and admit that he stole from Shimon, then he would never have to pay the kefil. He would be exempt forever from having to pay kefil. In which case, it's a question of who comes first. If Reuven first comes to Bezdin before Levi and Yehuda do, and admits that he stole from Shimon, so then he will never have to pay kefil. But if Levi and Yehuda come to Bezdin first and testify that Reuven stole from Shimon, Reuven will have to pay kefil. So the question is, what happens in a scenario where Reuven has not admitted that he stole from Shimon? And Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, hey, Levi and Yehuda, can you come and testify in Bezdin that Reuven stole from me, and that way he'll have to pay me kefil. And then they swear, they say they don't know anything. The question is, when they admit it, will they be chayav a korban Shevuos Ha'edus? Because how do we relate? The question is, how do we relate to this kefil payment? Do we relate to it as mammon? It's not bona fide mammon because it's money that right now, if they came and testified about, they would be mechayiv Reuven to pay the kefil. But at the same time, if Reuven were to come first and admit it, then even when they come and testify, they would not be able to be mechayiv Reuven to pay the kefil. Right? It's like money that's like here now, but it could be gone tomorrow. Right? According to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that whenever they come to Bezdin and testify that Reuven stole from Shimon, they will be mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon. Okay? So then it's definitely mammon, right? They're being mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon mammon, right? And the mammon that will always be there, and any time they come to testify about it, they'll be mechayiv Reuven to pay them money. So certainly by denying it, they are denying Shimon a bona fide payment, and therefore they'll be chayiv for that. But according to the Chacham, who said that if Reuven were to come first and admit that he stole from Shimon, he would be potter from paying kefel, even if Levi and Yehuda came. So how do we relate to this payment in a scenario where Reuven has not yet come, and therefore by Levi and Yehuda coming, they will be mechayiv Reuven and Shimon, but they will be mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon kefel, but they're being mechayiv Reuven to pay a payment to Shimon that is chayiv to pay in a certain sense based on a technicality. That the reason why Reuven is chayiv to pay Shimon is only because he didn't admit it first. So it's not like a bona fide payment that's like always there. It happens to be there right now because he didn't admit it. If he were to have admitted it, then there would be no payment. So if Levi and Yehuda deny, if they swear that they don't know this testimony, then they admit it. Are they chayiv a korban Shevuos ha'edus? Because as we're going to learn about on Amud Beis, Shevuos ha'edus is specifically by mammon. Do we consider this payment, which is kind of like what was the word I used a minute ago? Circumstantial. I don't know. Right? Do we refer to this payment, which happens to be relevant now, but could very easily go away if Reuven admits it? Do we view it as bona fide mammon? That by them swearing that they don't know anything about it, they would be chayiv to bring a korban Shevuos ha'edus, or not? That's just one layer. That's the layer of Moed B'Knas Potter and how it relates to the machlokas between Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. And now there's the next layer. The next layer being Davar Gorim L'Mamon K'Mamon Dami that we learned about yesterday. Here also there's a machlokas between Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. Okay, so we had said that when it comes to Moed B'Knas Potter, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that whenever the Levi and Yehuda come and testify, they'll be mechayiv Reuven to pay kefel to Shimon. So certainly it's bona fide mammon, and if they swear that they don't know anything, they're going to be chayiv for that. The question is as we just talked about, the question is according to the Chachamim, who say that if Reuven were to come first and admit that he stole, he'd be potter from ever having to pay the kefel. So then how do we relate to this mammon, that when he hasn't yet come to Bezdin, and Levi and Yehuda swear that they don't know any testimony, and they could have been mechayiv him to pay kefel, would they be chayiv for that? So now, the next layer is Davar Agorim L'Mamon K'Mamon Dami. We had learned yesterday that according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, Davar Agorim L'Mamon K'Mamon Dami. We had learned yesterday about a scenario where Shimon says to Yehuda, can you come testify for me that Reuven owes me 100 zuzahs, let's say. And Yehuda swears he doesn't know any testimony. The question is, Chayiv a korban shvuah. Now, as we discussed yesterday, one witness cannot be mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon. Of course, you need two witnesses. However, what Yehuda would be able to accomplish is that Reuven would then have to swear that that he does not need to pay Shimon. And what might end up happening is that by Yehuda testifying, which would be mechayiv Reuven to swear, what might end up happening is that Reuven would say, you know what, I don't want to swear, I'd rather just admit that I owe the money, and it could lead to Shimon getting paid. So it's not that Yehuda will testify that Reuven owes the money and then Reuven will have to pay the money. No. It's that Yehuda will testify that Reuven owes Shimon money, which would be mechayiv him to swear, which then might lead to him admitting it, which would then mean that Shimon gets his money. So it's a davar gorim l'mamon. And Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says that davar gorim l'mamon is kimamon dami, and therefore Yehuda is going to be chayiv for swearing in that case. So it can be chayiv a korban shvuah, Shevuos ha'edus. So certainly, if that's how we view Davar Gorm Lemamon, that in a scenario where Yehuda cannot directly be Mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon, but can lead to a possibility of Reuven saying, you know what, I'd rather pay Shimon, and we're saying that Yehuda is Chayiv B'Korban Shevuos Eidos for that, well then certainly in our case, where Levi and Yehuda will be Mechayiv Reuven to pay Shimon because he hasn't admitted that he stole, certainly then Levi and Yehuda would be Chayiv a Korban Shevuos Eidos, because in this case, this isn't a Gorim, maybe they will definitely be causing Reuven to pay Shimon because he hasn't admitted it. So certainly according to Rabbi Elazar, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that by Davar Gorm L'Mamun, it's Kimamun Dam, and he's Mechayiv Yehuda, when there's one witness, certainly it would be Mechayiv Levi and Yehuda here, where they're gonna, by their testimony, Reuven will have to pay the Knas to Shimon. The question is, what about according to the Chacham who say Davar Gorm L'Mamun Lav Kimamun Dami? According to the Chacham who say Davar Gorm L'Mamun Lav Kimamun Dami, is that only because it's too far removed? Is it only because Yehuda coming to testify might lead to Reuven saying, you know what, I'd rather just pay, maybe, or maybe he'll just swear. And because it may have led to Reuven admitting that he owes the money and Shimon getting paid, therefore Yehuda, right. So the question is Yehuda going to be chayiv for a Korban Shevuos Eidos for that or not? The Chacham say no. By Davar Gorm, the possibility of maybe. The question is, what about in this scenario? In this case, where Levi and Yehuda, if they come and testify that Reuven stole from Shimon, they will definitely be mechayiv Reuven to pay kefil. However, the question is simply, how do we relate to this payment where, as we discussed earlier, if Reuven were to come and admit it first, then he would be potter from paying. So therefore, he would be potter from paying kefil if he admitted it. So therefore, on the one hand, yes, Levi and Yehuda coming right now and testifying about Reuven would be mechayiv in money. But this money could also disappear if Reuven admits it first. So the question is, do we say that this is more kind of definitive than a Davar Gorim L'Mamun? Davar Gorim L'Mamun, there's a possibility that maybe by testifying he might admit it and then Shimon would get paid. Here, Shimon would definitely be getting paid by Reuven if they come and testify. So would I say that even though they say that by Davar Gorm L'Mamun it's Lav Kimamun Dami, maybe in this case it would be considered money because they're definitely going to cause Reuven to pay, and therefore they should be chayiv b'Korban Shevuos Eidos? Or do we say that still this is not considered bona fide mammon, since if Reuven comes and admits it first, he won't have to pay it, so therefore they would be potter for Korban Shevuos Eidos? Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay. Okay. Fine. Those were two layers that each had their own layers. I think maybe now, let me also, while we're already at it, let's just get through all of the theory. Finally, the question that, this is something that we've already had back from Bava Kama, Daf Tezvav, Seth Bava Kama, Chatzi Nezek, like Palga Nizga Knoso, Palga Nizga Mamona. Okay, of course, if Reuven has an ox and it gores Shimon's ox and it's a first-time offender, so Reuven only needs to pay Shimon half damages. The question is why? If you say Chatzi Nezek Mamon, it means that, look, Reuven really needs to pay Shimon all of the damages. But because it's a first-time offender, or up until 3 times, but let's say first-time offender, because it's a first-time offender, we say, you know what, we're not going to make you pay all of it. Half of it is enough. So that's Chatzi Nezek Mamon, meaning this is money that Reuven owes Shimon. The other way to look at it is Chatzi Nezek Knosa, which is that, look, oxes don't usually gore. This was an anomaly. Reuven had no reason to assume that his ox was going to gore Shimon's ox. This kind of came out of left field. it wasn't Ruvain's fault, but we do want Ruvain to be extra careful, and therefore we say, Ruvain, you should know that if in the left field chance that your ox scores somebody else's ox, we're going to fine you half damages. So in that sense, Chatzi Nezek is a knas. Sheesh. That was like a 20 or more minute introduction, I think. I don't know how long that was. That was a very lengthy introduction to this Gemara. But now I think that we have been introduced well enough that I think that we should be able to handle this Gemara at this point. Now, there was a lot of layers there that needed explanation. So if Shimon comes to be mashbia, Levi and Yehuda to testify that Ruvain owes him a knas, okay, what is the halacha? If they swear that they don't know testimony, would they be chayiv a korban Shevuos ha'edus? So liba to Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon. So according to Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, so actually the Agos Abach flips around some of the words. So kind of cut the next three words and then paste them at the end of the next phrase. I think I wasn't planning to read it like this, but it does make it better, especially based on all that we've said so far. So according to Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, the Amar Yavo Edim V'Ya'idu, who he says when it comes to Moed B'Knas Potter, it's only temporary, and whenever Levi and Yehuda come to Bezdin and testify that Ruvain owes Shimon a fine, Ruvain will have to pay Shimon the fine, regardless of if he had admitted it in the past. Well, then lo tibailach. So in that case, there's no question at all. Obviously, Levi and Yehuda would be chayiv a korban shvua for their shvu, for the shvua that they made that they don't know anything when they did, because it's bona fide money. Anytime they would come to Bezin, regardless of if Ruvain had admitted anything or not, even if he did admit, it makes no difference. Whenever they come to Bezin, they will be mechayiv Ruvain to pay Shimon the fine. So it's bona fide money, and of course, according to Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, they would be chayav a korban shvua. Ki tibailach, the question is, aliba derabanan, according to the rabbis, the amir moed b'knas v'achakach bo edim potter. According to the rabbanan, who say that if Ruvain admits about the fine, even if Levi and Yehuda were to come later and testify that Ruvain owes Shimon this fine, it makes no difference. When Ruvain admits about a fine and then Levi and Yehuda come, potter, he is still potter, and therefore the question is still potter. So the question is, right now Ruvain has not admitted it, and right now if Levi and Yehuda were to come and testify for Shimon, Ruvain would be chayiv to pay the fine. But the question is, how do we relate to this money, since it's circumstantial money? I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does. I mean, it's money that right now he has to pay, but theoretically, if Ruvain admits it, then he won't have to pay it. So it's not bona fide money. How do we relate to it? Would they be chayav a korban shvua or not? So now going to our next layer about davar gorim l'mamun kimamun dami. So now the rabbis, by moed b'knas v'achakach bo edim potter, how do they relate to the question of davar gorim l'mamun? Ilem Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon dehacha ka'amar dehacha hakamar davar agorim l'mamun kimamun dami. So if we say that the rabbis who say moed b'knas v'achakach bo edim potter, if they say that davar agor, like Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, that davar agorim l'mamun is kimamun dami, meaning that when Yehuda, right, when Shimon comes to Yehuda and says, Yehuda, can you testify that Ruvain owes me money? And all Yehuda is capable of doing is forcing Ruvain to swear. However, that could lead to a scenario where he'll just admit it and say, you know what, I'd rather pay the money to Shimon, and it'll lead to Shimon getting the money. And Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon says that if Yehuda swears that he doesn't know anything, he'd be chayiv for that. Because even that kind of like possibility would be, right, davar gorim l'mamun is kimamun dami. It's considered mamun and to be chayiv. Well, then certainly in this case, right, certainly in this case, where Levi and Yehuda testifying will directly be Mechayev Reuven to pay Shimon, so then certainly they would say that he is that Levi and Yehuda are Chayev Korban Shevuos. If they hold Davar Garm L'Mamon K'Mamon Dami, Ela K'Rabbanan Dehacha Tamid Davar Garm L'Mamon Lav K'Mamon Dami Mai. But if they hold that Davar Agarm L'Mamon is Lav K'Mamon Dami, that Yehuda testifying about Reuven to be Mechayev Mashvua, which might lead to him just admitting and paying Shimon, is not enough to be Mechayev Yehuda Korban Shvua. So, what would they say? Kevan de ilu mode mipater lav mamona kokafrele. Do we say that, well, even though, yes, in this case, Levi and Yehuda testifying would directly be Mechayev Reuven to pay Shimon, however, because if Reuven were to show up first and admit what he did, he would be potter from paying the knas, therefore it's not bona fide money, and therefore they would be potter. O dilma, hashtami lo odi, but currently Reuven has not admitted it, and therefore by Levi and Yehuda coming, they will be Mechayev him to pay the knas, and therefore they're causing Shimon to lose money. Therefore maybe they should be Chayev. Okay, so the question is, when it comes to knas, and Levi and Yehuda are swearing that they don't know any testimony, when in fact they do, about a knas, and if they were to testify, it would be Mechayev Reuven to pay Shimon the knas, would they be Chayev a Korban Shvua for that? Tashma, coming here, Mashbi ani aleichem lo tavo v'taduni sheyesh li biyad ploni nezek v'chatzi nezek v'chatzi nezek knasu. So now, our Mishnah had said that in a scenario where Shimon goes to Levi and Yehuda and says, hey, can you testify that Reuven owes me chatzi nezek? We said in the Mishnah that he would be chayev for chatzi nezek. And chatzi nezek is a knas. So doesn't that mean that Levi and Yehuda would be chayev in a scenario of a knas? Well, Kamandam Palga nezek nizka mamonahu. Well, you could say that the Manda Amr in our Mishnah holds that Chatzi Nezek is Mamon and not a Knas. So it's not a proof about Knas. Okay, that's all fine and good if you in fact hold that Chatzi Nezek is Mamon. But if you hold that Chatzi Nezek is Knas, then wouldn't this Mishnah be indicating that Levi and Yehuda would be Chayev for a Knas? Chatzi Nezek tzor is still gemir la de mamonahu. Well, it's still not definitive, because you can explain that even if you say that Chatzi Nezek is generally a Knas, you could say that our Mishnah is talking about Chatzi Nezek in a scenario of tzroris. What tzroris is, if you remember from Bava Kama, is that if an ox is walking, and while it's walking, some rocks go flying and cause damage, so it's just walking normally, just walking down the street, minding its own business, but while it's walking, some rocks go flying and cause some damage. So in that case, even though everything was just happening normally, the ox was just walking normally, still the owner of the ox would be chayiv to pay half damages. Halacha l'moshe misina, and that's just considered mammon, and it's just considered mammon, and it would not be. So even if you say Chatzi Nezek is a knas, by tzrois it would be considered mammon, and we can say that the Mishnah is talking about that. So when it says Chatzi Nezek, we're not talking about knas, we're talking about mammon. Tashma tashlumei kefel. What about the fact that the Mishnah also mentions kefel, which we were using to, in our discussion, kefel. So mishum karna, to which the Gemara answers, well, yes, the Mishnah mentioned kefel, but the reason why Levi and Yehuda would be chayav a korban Shevuos edus is not for the testimony to be mechayav Reuven to pay the kefel, but for the principle, right? Meaning, if they're coming and testifying that Reuven stole from Shimon, so they're being mechayav Reuven to pay the principle and the kefel. So the reason why they are chayav a korban Shevuos edus for the denial is not on account of the kefel, but it's on account of, by refusing to testify, they were causing Shimon to lose out even on the principal amount as well. So that's what they're chayav for. And the principal amount is just mum. Right? And then we say, well, what about dal b'hei? That's a fine. We say also, but if they're going to testify that he stole and slaughtered or sold. So then also the reason why the chayiv a korban shvuos edus is not because of the fines of 4 and 5 times, but because of the fact that by refusing to testify, they're also causing Shimon to lose the principle as well, which is mammon. Sha'anas ish ploni ufita es biti. Okay, but the Mishnah had also said that if Shimon says, "Hey, Levi and Yehuda, can you testify that Reuven was honest or mefata my daughter?" I.e., so we're assuming now what it means is that therefore he owes me 50 silver coins, and that's a fine. We fine him 50 silver coins, and Shimon wants Levi and Yehuda to testify that Reuven owes him 50 silver coins as a fine, and we're saying that they're chayiv for that. So no, it's not talking about the fine, mishum boshes ufgam. No, that's also talking about just boshes, right? Meaning, in addition, right? Yes, there's a fine by ones umefata, but there's also boshes, embarrassment, and pagam, the damage that you do to her body. So, well, the fact that she's like not a basula anymore, and therefore it affects, right? She can't get the right. It affects the ksuba and other things. So, and that's mammon. That is not a knas. So basically, we kept on like trying to say, well, what about the chatzin? What about the kefa? What about the dalad vehei? What about the ones, mefata? We're saying all of those. I could argue that that's talking about mammon. It's not talking about knas, and we can't bring a proof from our Mishnah about whether you'd be chayv a korban shvuos edus by knas. My kamash milan kula mamono. In fact, the Gemara. Well, if the whole Mishnah is just talking about mammon, why are we giving 1,000 cases of mammon? If they're all just mammon. Well, reisha chada kamashmalan, seifa chada kamashmalan. Well, because the reisha of the seifa is teaching us one chiddush, as well as the mamish, the seifa, the very end of the Mishnah, is also teaching us a chiddush. Reisha chada kamashmalan, the chiddush of the first part of the end of the Mishnah, ayi chatzinezek, right? Meaning chatzinezek, kefel, etc. Reisha chada kamashmalan, the chatzinezek tzroros mamono, is that chatzinezek tzroros is considered mammon. Right, and that's why Levi and Yehuda would be chayav korban shvuos edus for it. Sefer chada kamash malan v'shehidlik is gedishi b'yom hakipurim, and in the sefer when it says that if Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, can you testify for me that Reuven burnt down my haystack on Yom Kippur, so they would be chayav korban shvuos edus. Lafuke midu ben Chudi ben Akana. To the exclusion of the opinion of Ibn Chuni ben Akana, the Tanya of Ibn Chuni ben Akana, Haya Osi Yom HaKippurim Ki Shabbos et Tashlumin, Ma Shabbos Chule. The Ibn Chuni ben Akana would make Yom Kippur and Shabbos the same when it comes to monetary damages and payments for monetary damages. That just like on Shabbos you'd be potter for monetary payments because you chayev misa for that. So therefore, also on Yom Kippur, you're potter for monetary damages. But our Mishnah is saying that they would be chayiv korban shvuos edus because we don't hold that. This Mishnah is not like Ibn Chuni ben Akana, and actually you would be chayiv for monetary cases, for monetary damages for damage done on Yom Kippur. Okay. Tashma kamanir mashbi ani aleichem. Okay. Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, I'm swearing you. If you don't come and testify, shehotzi ish plani shemer al biti chayav. Okay, so if we have a brisa where Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, come testify for me that Reuven married my daughter and he was motzi shemra. Right? He says lo matzos levitcha b'sulim, and he was a liar, and therefore he owes me 100 silver coins, and that's a fine. So chayav, and they are chayav to pay. They are chayav korban shvuos edus. Hodemi pi atzmo potter. Okay, this is like a little bit of a funny line. For now, we're assuming what it means is modeh b'knas v'achakach bo edim is potter like the chachomim. Okay, let's go weiter. Amani Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimoni. So we want to say that at least the reisha is Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. I.e., that we're saying that when Shimon swears Levi and Yehuda to testify that Reuven needs to pay him 100 silver coins as a fine, and we're saying that they're right, chayovin, they're saying chayiv. That's the Afkar Belazar Reb Shimon who says who says that whenever the witnesses come, Reuven will be chayav to pay, even if he admits it, and therefore it's mamish mamon, and that's why they are chayavin. But Ema Sefer, but what about the next part where it says Hoda mi'atzmo potter? Doesn't that mean ason l'Rabbanon? Isn't that like the Rabbanon was saying Moda b'knas v'achakach ba'oedim potters? They're not saying Hoda mi'atzmo potter means that if Reuven admits it on his own, he will never have to pay the 100 silver coins? No. Kula Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimoni. No, the whole thing is Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimoni Ochei Kamer. Lo mishkachas lo hoda mipi atzmo de potter elo hechat leka edim klav hoda me atzmo. That no, what it's saying is hoda mipi atzmo potter is it's saying that if Reuven admits and therefore is potter for paying the 100 silver coins, it's only so long as witnesses don't come, and that's why Levi and Yehuda need to come, and if they swear that they don't know any testimony, they'll be chayev according to Shevuos ha'edos, because when they come, they will be mechayev Reuven to pay no matter what. Sheesh. Just doing that first summit, I don't even know how long this was. They feel like it's like 45 minutes just to do the first summit. That was stark. A lot of layers there. Shnaikis, but I think we haven't proved what we would say about Shevuos ha'edos by a knas, according to the Chachamim say mod knas v'chakach ba'oedim potter. Interesting. Wow, Taka, these dafs the last few days have been very long. I think 2 days ago it was like 55 minutes. Yesterday it was over an hour. Today's probably going to be around an hour as well. Woo! Quite a lot of effort, these dafs. Next Mishnah, Mashbia ani aleichem im lo tavo v'ta'idu she'ani koin, she'ani levi, she'eni ben grusha, she'eni ben chalutza. Woo! Right, because it's like you got Shimon and Levi and Yehuda and Reuven and Chev. We're about to get to Yisachar. So Shimon comes to Levi and Yehuda and he says, Mashbi'ani aleichem, im lo tavo v'ta'idu. I'm reading this again. If you don't come and testify, she'ani koin. Can you come and testify for me that I'm a koin? Now, Shevuos ha'edos is specifically by money. As we spent a lot of time talking about it. Is it bona fide money, non-bona fide? Money, it has to be money. Here he's saying, can you testify that I'm a kohen? There's any Levi, that I'm a Levi. She'eni ben grusha, I'm not a ben grusha. She'eni ben chalutza, I'm not a ben chalutza. So I'll just tell you now, so potter. It's potter because, again, the Afghan has to be monetary cases. You can't testify about you're not going to be chayiv according to Shevuos ha'edos for non-monetary things. She'ish ploni koin, she'ish ploni Levi. If Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, can you testify that Yisachar is a koin or a Levi? She'en ben grusha or she'en ben chalutza, that he's not a ben grusha or ben chalutza. She'onas ish ploni es bito, ufita es bito. Or Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, can you testify that Reuven was onus mefate Yisachar's daughter? So here, right, so in these cases, he's not soliciting testimony for himself, he's soliciting testimony for Yisachar. V'shechavo bi b'ni, or Shimon says to Levi Yehuda, can you testify that my son wounded me? Therefore, it's chayv misa for that. I think it's chenek. V'shechavo bi chaveri, or my son, or my friend wounded me. Shehidlik Gedishi b'Shabbos, or that he burnt my haystack down on Shabbos. In these cases are potter because these are misa cases; these are not mamonis cases. Givaldik. So in this Mishnah, in all these scenarios, potter. Okay. In fact, the Gemara time of the ish ploni koin, the ish ploni Levi. Hamanon lefloni biyad ploni chayavin. So the Gemara asks, it's not really done with its question, but it's asking. So we're saying, if Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, hey, can you testify that Yisachar is a Kohen or a Levi? We say, okay, potter, because we're talking about money. Implying that, okay, fine. So the issue is not like that Shimon's not coming to solicit for himself. Right, that's not the problem. Right? The problem is not that he's soliciting for somebody else, for Yisachar. But that doesn't seem to be the issue. The issue is that he's talking about, can you testify as a coin? We need a monetary case. Okay, well then the implication is, okay, fine. So then, what then if Shimon comes and asks Levi and Yehuda to testify that Ruvain owes Yisachar money? He's representing Yisachar. Implication being that would be fine. And therefore, if Shimon and Levi swear that they don't know anything, they would be chayav according to Shevuos Eidos. Again, time of the Ploni Kohen, Ploni Levi. The reason why Levi and Yehuda are Pturin are because Shimon is coming to, is being mashbidim to testify that Yisachar is a Levi or a Kohen. Hamana the Floni biad Ploni. But if Shimon says, hey, Levi and Yehuda, can you testify that Ruvain owes Yisachar money, i.e. Shimon is coming and representing Yisachar, Chayovin, they would be chayiv. But Akatani Sefer, we're going to learn in the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Hey, that no, you would have to hear from Yisachar directly. The Mishnah Lamed, we've seen this before, I think. The Mishnah Lamed Hey says, if he sends with his Eved, or if Ruvain comes and say, hey, can you testify for Shimon? It doesn't work. Right? The person who's getting paid is the one who needs, right? The person whose money is at stake, who by the testimony of Levi and Yehuda would get paid, and by their refusal to testify, he's losing money. He's the one who needs to come and say Mashbi'a ani aleichem for them to be chayiv a korban Shevuos. So how are we saying that Shimon can do it on behalf of Yisachar? So Mashmuel b'Baba Harshal. So says Shmuel, well, it's talking about where Shimon has power of attorney. Shimon is representing Yisachar. That's why he can do it. But I thought the Nardaean said that we don't write power of attorney documents to collect money, because what would the document say? The document would say that, I guess Yisachar is saying, I am making Shimon my representative to collect my money that Ruvain has. The thing is, it's not considered his money till he gets it back, because I assume it's based on the concept of milva l'otzoa nitna, that when Yisachar gives money to Ruvain, it's for him to spend, right? And therefore, it's not Yisachar's anymore; it's Ruvain's. He has to pay back other money. He has to replace it later. He has to pay it back later. But so therefore, because the document would say something to the extent of, I Yisachar am making Shimon my representative to collect my money from Ruvain, which isn't true, so then, it looks like, and then there are witnesses signed on the document, but the whole thing looks like not really true, because it's not really Yisachar's money until he gets it back. So, yeah, but that's only if Ruvain denies owing the money of Allah, kafre kasvinon, but we can write a power of attorney document if Ruvain has not denied anything, and therefore, I guess this is talking about a scenario where Ruvain hasn't denied anything, and, okay, Shimon is coming as a representative of Yisachar, and he's asking Levi and Yehuda to testify, and so that Ruvain will pay Yisachar, and they would be chayav korban Shevuos Eidos for that. Okay, now basically till the end of the daf, it shouldn't be too difficult. For the end of the daf, be'etzem, we are going to have a few different explanations for how we know that Shevuos Ha'edus is specifically by money, specifically by mumminess, right? That mummin, that that Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, can you testify that Reuven owes me money? That's what we're talking about. Givaldim. Okay, fine. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught she'ein minayin she'ein hakosim v'daber ela b'tvias mummin. How do we know that Shevuos Eidos is specifically for cases of mummin? Right? When Shimon is asking Levi and Yehuda to testify on his behalf that Reuven owes him money. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer, Nemar kan o'in. It says a bunch of O's by Shevuos Eidos. V'nemar laholan, it says by Shevuos HaPikadon o'in. Right? By Shevuos Eidos, it says, "V'nefesh kisechta v'shama kol Allah v'u eid o ra'a o yada It says by Shevuos HaPikodin, Nefesh Kisechta Amala Mal B'Hashem V'Kichas V'Amito B'Pikodin O B'Tzumas Yad O B'Gazel O Ashekas Amito. And while I'm in the Pesukim, I'm just going to read two more Pesukim. You're going to see that there's a bunch of O's also by Rotseach, by a murderer, as well as by a Sota. By murderer it says, Vim B'Sina Yedofenu O Ishlich Olav B'Tzdiya V'Yamos O B'Eva Yiko, etc. And by Sota it says, V'Avar Lavruach Kino V'Kines Isha V'Hi Nitma O Avar Lavruach Kino, etc. And then it says, O Isha Shetavar Lav. Okay, so basically, we're not there yet, but rather than keep on jumping back between the Gemara and the Pesukim, basically, we're going to see that we're starting off by saying that there are these multiple O's by, we're going to call them O-in. There are O-in by Shevuos Eidus and Shevuos HaPikodin. We're going to see in just very shortly that there's also O-in by Rotseach, as well as by Sota, by a murderer, as well as a Sota. Okay, let's start again. Tanar Banan, Menayin she'ein akos b'daber ela b'tvias mammon. How do we know that Shevuos Eidus is dafka by mammon? Rabbi Eliezer Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer nemer kan o-in. Well, it says by Shevuos Eidus o-in. Nemer laholan o-in. It says by Shevuos HaPikodin o-in. Malaholan einu b'daber ela b'tvias mammon, which is like Shevuos HaPikodin is dafka money. So Afkan einu b'daber ela b'tvias mammon. So also by Shevuos Eidus, we're talking about money. O-in the Rotseach. Yeah, but what about Rotseach? It says o-in. Shein o-in. Umidabim shelo b'tvias mammon. So it says o-in by Rotseach, and that's not mammonis, that's nefashos. So done in o-in sheyesh imoyin shvua, me o-in sheyesh imoyin shvua vayochichu o-in the Rotseach shein imoyin shvua. The thing is, what Shevuos Eidus and Shevuos HaPikodin have in common is that yes, they both have o-in, and they're both Shevuos. Rotseach is not a Shvua. So we're not learning out from Rotseach. We're learning out Shevuos Eidus from Shevuos HaPikodin. O-in the Sota yochichu. What about Sota? Shein o-in v'yesh imoyin shvua. Also says o-in by Sota, and there's a Shvua, right? Kol Allah. What is it? They make her swear, and then she says Amin, Amin. So it says o-in by Sota, and that is, there's a Shvua there, so why don't we learn it out from Sota? It's not talking about strictly a Dinei Mammonis case. There is the part of the Ksuba, but that's not like the main thing by Sota. So then o-in sheishima and Shvua ve'enimo and Kohen, me o-in sheishima and Shvua ve'enimo and Kohen, va'yochichu o-in the Rotseach, she'en imo and Shvua, va'yochichu o-in the Sota, shav v'sheyeshima and Shvua, yeshima and Kohen. I'm going to read that again. Done in o-in sheishima and Shvua ve'enimo and Kohen, we learn out Shevuos Eidus, which they're o-in, and there's no Kohen, there's o-in, no Kohen. May o-in sheyesh imo shvua ve'ein imo Kohen. From Shevuos HaPikodin, which has o-in and no Kohen. Vayuchichu o-in the Rotseach, and don't try to learn out from the o-in of the Rotseach she'ein imo shvua, where there's no shvua over there. Vayuchichu o-in the Sota, and don't learn out from the o-in of Sota shav b'shei yeshima and shvua, that even though there's a shvua there, yeshima and Kohen, there is a Kohen. We need o-in with a shvua without a Kohen. O-in, shvua, no Kohen. Rabbi Kiva Omer says, Rabbi Kiva, v'yekiyesham le'achas mei eile. And we're going to actually, we're going to kind of massage Rabbi Kiva's opinion more tomorrow. But for now, we're just going to read it how it is now, which is Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva vaya ki yeshem la'achas mei eile. That if it says by Shevuos Eidus, and really by Shevuos Eidus and Shevuos Bitui and Tumas Mikdash Shugaloshov, it says if he's chayiv for one of these things, mei eile, from these things, yesh mei eile shu chayiv, there's from these things that he's chayiv, yesh mei eile shu poter, there are from these things that he's poter, aketza tavo mamun chayiv, the racha poter. He's going to be chayiv for mamun, he's going to be poter by Shevuos Eidus, he's going to be poter for other things. He's only chayiv for mamun, and we're going to delve deeper into that tomorrow. Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer says, Rabbi Yosef Glili Arei Omer v'u'ed o ra'a o yada. It says by Shevuos Eidus that he's a aid, Either he saw or he knew. Be'edus hamiskayemes b're'iyah below yediyah u'v'yediyah below re'iyah hakos medaber. So it's talking about testimony that could be with seeing without knowing and knowing without seeing. And that is specifically Dini Mamonis. The Gemara is going to explain it right now, but I'll just explain it outside first. By Dini Mamonis, how can you have knowing without seeing? Well, for example, if Levi and Yehuda heard Reuven admit to Shimon that he owes Shimon money, so even though they didn't see the loan, they know that he owes the money because they heard it, right. They were Eidei Hoda'ah. They heard him admit it. And how can you see without knowing? Well, if Levi and Yehuda just see Shimon give Reuven money, but they don't know, is it a gift? Is Shimon paying Reuven back? Is it a loan? But they don't know what it is. So they saw it, but they don't know what it is. So that's specific to Mamonis. And I think we're going to ask on this tomorrow. We're going to delve deeper into all of these opinions tomorrow. But anyways, so I'm going to read that again. Rabbi Yosef Omer says, Rabbi Yosef Omer, it says, V'u'ed o ra'a o yada. Be'edus miskayem is b're'iyah below yediyah v'yediyah below re'iyah. With seeing without knowing and knowing without seeing. But that's what the pasuk is talking about, which is Mamonis. Re'iyah below yediyah ketzad. How can you see it without knowing what it is? Mana manisi licha b'fnei ploni ufloni. Well, if Shimon says to Levi and Yehuda, I gave you money in front. If Shimon says to Reuven, I gave you money in front of Levi and Yehuda. Now they don't necessarily know what the reason for the giving, but the money was given in front of them. Yavo ploni ufloni v'ya'idu zoi re'iyah b'lo yediyah. And Reuven says, okay, let them come and testify. So that is that they saw it, even though they don't necessarily know what they saw. Yediyah b'lo re'iyah, knowledge without seeing. Ketzad haso mano hodisa li bifnei ploni ufloni. Shimon says to Reuven, you admitted to me that you owe me money in front of Levi and Yehuda. Yavo ploni ufloni v'ya'idu. And Reuven says, okay, let Levi and Yehuda come and testify. Zoi yediyah b'lo re'iyah. That is an example of Levi and Yehuda know about the loan without having seen it. Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon chayev kan v'chayev b'pikadon. He's chayev a korban by Shevuos Eidos as well as by Shevuos HaPikadon. By Shevuos Eidos it's a korban chatas, and by Shevuos HaPikadon it's a korban osham. I assume that's what it's talking about. Right, chayev. Where am I? I don't know. I assume the chiyuv is talking about the korban. What are you chayev by Shevuos HaEidos as well as by Shevuos HaPikadon? Malahalon einu medaber el b'tvias mamon. Just like by Shevuos HaPikadon, it's specifically talking about mamon. So Afkan also by Shevuos HaEidos einu medaber ela b'tvias mamon. Shevuos HaEidos is also talking about mamon. Ve'od and more so kavachomer. You can also say a kavachomer. Ma Pikadon, which is more broad. Shazabo noshim kanoshim. Shevuos HaPikadon, it applies to men, women, krovim karichokim, relatives, non-relatives, psulim, kiksherim, apostle, kosher people, v'chayev, al kolachas v'achas, and also you'll be chayev for every single shvua, bifnei bezdin, bifnei bezdin, v'shalo bifnei bezdin, whether the shvua was inside bezdin, outside of bezdin, and yet, einu medaber el b'tvias mamon. And yet, it is limited to mamon. Even though there's men, women, kosher, apostle, karov, rachel, in bezdin, outside bezdin, mamon. That's it. So Eidus, Shevuos Eidus, which is already more limited, Shalaya Saba Noshim Kanoshim, doesn't apply to women like men, Krovim Karichokim, relatives like non-relatives, Psulim Kiksherim, apostle people like kosher people, Ve'enu Chayv Ela Achaz Bifnei Bezdin, and if he admits and if he swears in Bezdin, he's only be chayiv once, not multiple times. Enu din shlei midaber ela b'tvias mamon. Certainly, then it should be only by mamon. If by pikadon, which is, let's say, more inclusive, but is specific to mamon, well then Shevuos HaEidos, which is already more limited, it makes sense to say that it should be limited to mamon. To which the Gemara says, well, mal pikadon, I could actually make an argument that Shevuos HaPikadon is actually in some ways more limited than Shevuos HaEidos because shekein lo asaba mushba kanishba. Okay, we're going to have to dig down, drill into this more tomorrow. But By Shevuos HaPikadon, we're not chayav mushba mipi acherim, as we are mushba mipi atzmo, by Shevuos HaPikadon, as well as umezid kishogig, you're potter b'mezid, by Shevuos HaPikadon. Tomar be'edos, but by Shevuos HaEdos, you can also by mushba kinishba. By Shevuos HaEdos, you're chayav for mushba mipi acherim, as well as mushba mipi atzmo. Umezid kishogig, you're chayav for mezid, as well as shogig. So maybe it could be more than just Shevuos. It could be more than just Mammon. Maybe only Shevuos HaPikadon is limited to Mammon. Maybe Shevuos HaEdos is more things. Well, we have a Gzeir Shava, Techeta, Techeta. It says Techeta both by Shevuos HaEdos as well as Shevuos HaPikadon. Nemakan Techeta, V'nemelahalon Techeta, Malahalon, Enu Medabel B'Tvias Mammon. Afkan Medabel B'Tvias Mammon. Just like by Shevuos HaPikadon is specifically Mammon, so also by Shevuos HaEdos is specifically Mammon. And we're going to stop here. Sheesh, is this like another over an hour and 7 minutes? Wow. I have a chavrusa. It starts mamish in 5 minutes. I'm still at home. I'm still recording Babylon Talmud. How am I supposed to be at his house in 5 minutes? I thought for sure I had enough time. It's like 3 days in a row of like hour dafs. Sheesh. I wasn't even planning to get further, but whoo, sheesh. Wow. I have some bubbly wine in the freezer. I hope it hasn't exploded. Wow, what did we talk about today? Wow. The first Mishnah we talked about different scenarios where to be chayiv, and wow, yeah, where like, you know, if he says like, let's say chitin and tzor and kusmin, so if he swears about chitin, tzor and kusmin, he'd be chayiv for each one. But if he just swears once, he'd be chayiv once, and so like that applies to like general and specific kind of things. Then we got into the whole thing about knas. And we got into Moed b'Knas v'Achakach Bo Eidim, would he be Chayev or Potter Machlokas or Chacham or Belaz or Shimon? We got again into Davar Garmin Mammon Kimamon Dami. That's also Machlokas or Belaz or Shimon and the Chacham. We got into Chatzin as a Mammon, Chatzin as a Knas. We got into all sorts of things trying to figure out if you would be Chayev according to Shevuos HaEdos by Knas. And then we got to another Mishnah. And we are getting, which kind of discussed that you would only be chayiv according to Shevuos HaEdos by Mammon, and now we gave several opinions about how we know that Shevuos HaEdos is specifically by Mammon, and tomorrow we're going to dig deeper into those opinions. Have a good one. Peace out.